ערב טוב לכולם.
Good evening and congratulations my dear old friend Professor Uriel Reichman and to Major General Amos Gilad and to all those who have come to this conference, the participants and those watching on the networks, the television, the organizers behind the scenes. Now, we have seen a kind of civil awakening, not only the buds of this awakening, but truly the beginning of the blossoming of it. If we look at all the various end to the political corruption, and we have seen how radicals are taking over our government, a majority, I would say, of the state of Israel, that silence is no longer an option. The demonstrations in Petach Tikva, the protest about the two nations, and about the disabilities and violence against women, all these are the beginning of an Israeli spring. Our people are wise and strong, and they know that what future could bring, even if it is deficient. There is a tremor here that is surrounding us, and this will not end. These are not sporadic demonstrations scattered and fragmented, but this is the beginning of a unification. I believe 2 years ago on this podium, I congratulated the new government and I prayed for its success, but I warned that we may suddenly become anxious or leak into a two-nation state, a binational state, and that we would become despondent and we would become indifferent. But suddenly, because of an erroneous vision, we're in a slippery slope, and we might find ourselves in that binational state solution, which is against Israeli law, against international law, and against all those principles embedded in the Declaration of Independence. I warned that the Netanyahu government would try to entrench us and destabilize those values of democracy, and we would become an apartheid state that would continue detrimentally affecting civil society, free media, the spirit of the IDF, and the High Court of Justice. And again, time and time again, if we're talking about the Minister of Justice and her declarations, we're talking about all this kind of the law that was called the law of Gezel that was given by Benny Begin. They understood that that law would bring us and its leaders to the International Criminal Court of Justice in Hague. He warned them, Benny Begin, and Ayelet Shaked and Bibi, but he didn't continue that, and he said that law of robbery, that's what I would call it, will not be brought to the government's table. He waited to see what the reactions would be, and within a matter of few hours, he received a document signed by 26 members of Knesset that no, in other words, everyone except him, Benny Begin, Steinitz, and a couple of other people. And this document, in that he was asked to continue trying to pass that bill. So Bibi, as usual, he just folded up. And then, of course, Shaked and a competition started who will lead and who bit the helm for that law. And that would lead us to the criminal court in Hague if they continued with it. So let's go back to the threats of the Minister of Justice about these were talking about throwing people out and this robbery literally under our noses and this detrimental effect on the Supreme Court of Justice, and we're talking about everything that is happening, trying to promote a totally superfluous and dangerous code of ethics that was totally changing the character of the schools and universities, and by prohibiting all sorts of theatrical performances and even detrimentally affecting the commanders and the soldiers and the spirit of the IDF. On top of that, we're talking about a kind of condemnation of our basic principles that was in order to serve the survival instincts of the Prime Minister, the indictment about his actual residence, and those issues that could not be explained in what was called File 1000 and File 2000, basically actually accusing him of corruption, and now later on if we're talking about the submarine and all those issues. So, and the actual press and the broadcasting corporation, and a kind of attempted putsch on anything, on left and right, anyone who dared criticize. And here is my conclusion. This personal survival instinct and the destabilization of democracy are a derivative of the person who is at the helm, who is leading us to a very steep, slippery slope. In the past, Israel had prime ministers who were ready to take a risk on their seat in order, yes, to safeguard the state. He is willing to risk the state to safeguard his seat. Israel will soon be 70 years old. Zionism undoubtedly was the most successful national enterprise of the 20th century. All those wars, campaigns between them, and intifadas. But we've seen an increase in the GDP. They say that it is 70 times its size, with one of the strongest currencies in the world. We are members of the OECD. We are a startup nation. In NASDAQ, we're talking about more issuances and more actual trading than any other country outside the United States. They glorify the educational system, well, at least talking about what they learned 30 years ago, hoping that we'll actually retain those standards nowadays as well. We have got unprecedented achievements and excellent people, direct, kicking, sometimes a little bit too boisterous, but very proud of its own achievements and of the IDF, its anthem, its flag, and the essence they are willing to sacrifice and unify at the moment they are tested. So it is clear we're talking about a Jewish democratic state that believes in itself and is flourishing, and its achievements. It's one of the most progressive in the world in education, science, technology, in the quality of life, and perhaps over time the standard of living as well. A country with solidarity that awards equal opportunities to everyone, but demands responsibility in each sector, wherein our children will choose to live out of their own willpower, and Jews from around the world, especially Jewish youth, will be proud because of their affinity and their affiliation with Israel, and perhaps will even immigrate to Israel. All of us agree that those three principles that spearhead us to lead to that objective. Number one, security, before and above everything else. Number two, the actual unification of the people is more important than of the land. And third, a paragon society in the spirit of the prophets and the Declaration of Independence as a foundation stone. And therefore the struggle of our path is not between the left and the right, but between those who accept those three principles I just mentioned, and those who are rejecting it and use it as some kind of lip service in order to shake those who are naive and who do not accept that, and the whole world. So you ought to have nationalistic, proud, or a very dismal nationalism. What's the difference between the two? This proud nationalism differentiates between the fact that we are people who have a heritage and a mission, but they demand of themselves a positive vision to forge a paragon society in the spirit of Jabotinsky and Herzl and Ben-Gurion's work, to be better, fairer, with more solidarity, stronger, tolerant, and more just, so that we should be worthy of the heritage that we are so proud of. This dismal nationalism, because of the lack of this positive vision and the deficiency of a deep self-confidence, they mold an identity by dwarfing others and not by elevating ourselves. And therefore, it is necessary that there are animals of prey from outside and collaborators from the inside. The other, the hated, those you feel enmity for and you humiliate, they detrimentally affect that kind of proud nationalism. That will actually mold our entire political discourse. Our proud nationalism says there is a vision, there is a unifying message. It calls upon people to cohese. Please unify under those three principles, that together in their existence, that will be a guarantee for the continued burgeoning of the Zionist principle. There are those who voted for all the left and the center, and they have reacted beautifully to that kind of cry. But on the other dismal side, they have a rifting, inciting, dismantling message, and they look poo-pooing, denigrating the other, and only when they dwarf others and humiliate others do they feel elevating. So if you think about Rabbi Kaduri, they forgot what it means to be Jews. And then, do you remember when those Arabs stampeded to elect in the last elections? They incited, and the scepter of selection is in his hands, and they repeat the two questions that were asked by Finkelstein. And they first asked, who are you first, a Jew or an Israeli? Those who have forgotten should go to one side, and the others who remember it go to one side. Either do you love or hate Arabs? So on one side, you go there, and on the other side, you go to the other. These questions, to those questions, these are my answers. I am a Jew and an Israeli as one, simultaneously, to the same degree, and I do not recognize the authority of anyone to teach me the morals about anything else. Thank you very much for that applause. Do it every time I feel a little hoarse. It's perfect. I'll just have a drink while you're applauding. And secondly, I do not hate or love Arabs. I love the people of Israel and are frightened about its future. But who are these leftists? And who actually have the right to give them ranks and grades? Did they serve less than you? Do they pay less taxes? When you start denigrating them, these leftists don't have hands, bodies, senses, emotions, instincts. If they are stabbed, do they not bleed? If they are tickled, do they not giggle? And I'm not going to this was from Shakespeare, by the way, he says, but a little respect and dignity for the others, including our enemies, for human beings, a little bit of respect for history and its lessons. It wouldn't actually harm those nationalists to feel that as well. I think that instead of those double selection spectacles that we work, that they have been, that this public has been suffered, and instead of that, be proud nationalists and cohese around the actual entirety of our people and the importance of our people, because otherwise we are breaking up the camps instead of creating and unifying. Don't forget the security before anything and the entirety of our people. And in deeds, please, not only, in other words, walk the talk. Every day the government actually contradicts every single day these three principles. They say security, but they say no, a messianic touch. They talk about the entirety of the people, but their deeds say no, of the greater Israel. So in other words, they're talking about dismal nationalism, which is something which is totally different from our proud nationalism, although they claim it in their mouth, one in their mouth and one in their soul. So in other words, this is apartheid, that it is closer to what kings perhaps speak about rather than what our prophets spoke of. But the paragon society, it definitely is not. These dismal nationalistic believers in the leaders, they presume to give themselves the truth about the heritage of the Israel. And of course, this is something that should never be spoken about. They didn't actually. The commander of the paratroopers who liberated Jerusalem, they never put phylacteries on and prayed in the morning. Exactly who of the right-wingers presume to teach us and those in our footsteps what is courage, what it means to sacrifice, and what it means to love your homeland?
And who is presumptuous to tell us what is the right connection to each and every one of us to the Jewish heritage? I approach those leaders of the national vision because we say there are 70 different faces to the Torah. Who are you to dictate to all of us what we should choose? And also it says about the Torah that Torah goes in pleasant ways. All its paths are peace. Where is the Torah and where are you? How does your apartheid vision correspond with the requirements of the prophet, with the former prophets and the person who visioned Jerusalem and Judea in the name of God to say, why do I need your evil? I don't want to see your evil. Stop being evil. Ask for justice. Judge the orphan and the widow. Where are those people? How come you forgot all about them and you're trying to reduce the Jewish heritage without them? I feel closer to the Likud person who cries about the loss of his faith and understand that Jabotinsky would be shocked to see the leaders of the party today, the way they carry themselves, their conduct, the way they do things. I feel closer, more than you, to a religious man who respects the will of his daughter to enlist into the army. Although Rabbi Levenstein cautions her, I feel closer to the core of the Jewish heritage and the values of the prophets and our sages from the two temples. I feel closer than those who speak in high words today, who go on the wall and sow hatred among these people. And as for the security of Israel, the Six-Day War was a groundbreaking moment of the greatest victory in our history, and changed the face of Israel and its status in the region and the world. A very exciting and moving moment to all of us. All of us. The moment we saw the Wailing Wall, we saw Beit El and Shiloh, all those places from the Bible, Hebron, an encounter with the cradle of our being as a people and as messengers. I realized you understood the hint and you started applauding when I stopped for a minute. But from that moment on, also in the religious Zionism, there was an ignition of a political faith which identifies in the results of the war the biblical dimension, the redemption, the God's decree, and the messianic kind of thinking. And that's where this settlement movement in Judea, Samaria, with this terrible controversy that takes us to today, because we're talking about the future of the territories and the role of those isolated settlements. It is agreed by all of us that we are present in Judea and Samaria because it's our privilege, not because of power. We have a historical, moral, natural right, as it says in the Scroll of Independence. We all feel that we're connected to that right, but when we talk about its political realization, we have to talk about concrete historical conditions, not wishful thinkings and not prayers. We have to talk about security and the future of this country. Even in our sages who spoke about Jewish sovereignty in the short periods of where they reigned in the past, in the last few years, the leadership of the right talks about those isolated settlements as if they're important to the security, but it's not true at all. This controversy with political implications throughout the years, Rabin, Peres, myself, Sharon, Olmert, all the prime minister, in the last 2.5 years, it formed under the right-wing government without any checks and balances towards a reality that's dangerous, and it compels courage before it is fatal. And now we know it's all smoke screens, all sorts of plans. Now it's all in the open. For the last 2.5 years, the government of the right, headed by Netanyahu, who's dragged by Bennett, leads the agenda towards a one state. And it means that Israel is going to stay forever. The entire territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, there will be no Palestinian state. They'll get an autonomy. And 3, the building in the isolated settlements will continue while maneuvering all the pressures in order to create an irreversible reality, and 4, the world will be forced to get used to it. Today, the world is busy with terror and refugees, and the Middle East is a tough neighborhood. Israel is still a villa in the jungle, as I used to describe it. But therefore, we have to be with sword in hand and a finger on the revolver. And we have to defeat any threat. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian terror, Iran, even if it's delayed by 8 years, and ISIS, all these threats are still there. We cannot underestimate any one of them. But there's also good news. Israel, as a result of its achievements in the last 70 years, and the head of the intelligence spoke about it, and other people from the IDF as well, Israel is the strongest state in the area. It's the strongest militarily, strategically, the strongest economically. We heard that there are bigger economies. There's no vibrant and ready economy, so ready for the future and ready to go into all things like the State of Israel. And Israel is with technological supremacy in the entire Middle East, and if it conducts well with its relations with the United States and Europe, will also be the strongest from a political point of view. Opponents can disrupt a lot for short periods our way of life and to jeopardize our sense of security and normalcy, but none of them today is an existential threat. Israel must and can discuss from a position of self-confidence its future, its security, and its borders. If you listen between the lines and all the information in the lecture of the head of the intelligence, if you listen to all the heads of the IDF the last 2 days and the head of the Shabak, you heard these things from their mouth in a way that's unequivocal. As I will explain in a minute, their existential threat on the future and the security of Israel is the agenda of the one state and the slippery slope that leads us, the government of Netanyahu. And by walking towards the precipice, like that old joke that we were on the edge of the precipice, but soon we're going to take one step ahead. The fact that one state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean will definitely be either binational with an Arab majority and a civil war, or an apartheid regime that deals with violence and a threat of collapse. There's no practical proposal except for maneuvers and self-delusion. People blindly believing in God and these things. Therefore, this is the existential threat on the entire Zionist enterprise. In order to do away with this idea of one state, Netanyahu does it with great talent, but he deludes and deceives the public, including his voters. He keeps saying, as if continuance of building isolated settlements all over Judea and Samaria, as if this continuous building is essential to the security of the state. And without staying there forever, all through Judea and Samaria, there's no possibility to protect the state of Israel. So he says, nothing is further from the truth. There are things that are essential, that the settlements, a few of them are strategic sites, to have a security zone close to the airport, Jerusalem, military presence in the Jordan Valley. These are all essential to our security. But isolated settlements really are not part of this group. They have nothing to do, no security contribution, full stop. Actually, they jeopardize security. They just complicate our separation process, which is necessary. The right-wing arguments have no basis, but national security, we're not talking about controlling God knows what borders that are so. This, our strength is the general capabilities and the technological edge, and the help of the United States and the international ties and the moral supremacy, if we can keep it going, and the internal unity. It's not by chance that 90% of the high echelon of officers in the army, in the police, in the Mossad, past and present, they all think that the two-state solution with a permanent border and agreed upon agreements that are based on achievements, and we know that one state is going to be stable to the other, that this solution of two states is better than the alternative of one state, that somehow you fight terror from within, and that eventually it's going to be a binational state with a majority Arab citizens and an apartheid regime. Bitan, who is the brain and the belly of the Likud, he asked, how come they're becoming leftists after we appoint them? That was one of his, he talked about the Shabak, and he talked about the police, and about the IDF. And the answer is, it's just reality. People who deal day and night in decisions of life and death cannot act according to wishful thinking or even a political point of view. Their responsibility makes them act according to the reality that they live in. Managing the conflict by Bibi is dragged, it's deceiving, it's delusional, and it only strengthens the question marks about the question, what does Israel want? When President Trump looks from Washington at the map of the world, he sees 6 hot spots: North Korea, the Sea of South Sea with the artificial islands, Iran, Syria, Ukraine, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. From the White House, it seems that this conflict has the lowest risk and the award or the prize or the best yield possible. There's no chance that at any stage of this conflict, suddenly you see a city like 15 million people like Seoul being devastated. There's no risk that you have to emergency send aircrafts in order to save the day. From there, and most of them are real estate people. It looks like a real estate conflict. It looks like two families. They have a similar house with 13 rooms and 3 bathrooms, and now they're fighting who gets the 3rd bathroom and who's going to hold 2/3 of the living room. It's not like that. Of course, it's much more complicated, but that's what it looks like to people who look at it from afar. No one in the world doesn't think that we are Switzerland here, but I'm telling you with full responsibility, nobody in the world understands how come the government of Israel sees in a Palestinian state, which is demilitarized, almost completely not viable, surrounded by the Israeli forces, the strongest army in the world, almost a nuclear superpower, backed by America, including technologies that they didn't even give to their own soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. How does this non-viable state, which is surrounded, is an existential threat on Israel? And I say existential. Okay, there's a threat. No, say existential threat on Israel. This sounds like either fabricated or visionary or completely crazy planning. Behind Bibi's shoulders, people look at us and with those very extreme, good idea, I'll stop and drink, he says, the most extreme ministers in Netanyahu's government. He's talking about a doctrine that could have been ridiculous and ludicrous, or to be against that, it's like an Israeli incitement, except if the man would be the deputy speaker of the Knesset. The 3 choices he gives to the Palestinians: either you will be deported, or you will be an immigrant class, second-class immigrant, or you're going to fight, and the IDF will know exactly what to do with it. God forbid, if this is the people that its elected government does these things and talks about these doctrines. We're talking about a religious group, and he was there. He was lecturing about this distorted doctrine. And a woman asked him, Mr. Smutsmich, do you mean that the IDF is going to shoot women and children? And he said, the deputy speaker of the Knesset said, war is war, à la guerre comme à la guerre. Those people who plan the security of Israel, and we're talking about the lesson of basing ourselves only on ourselves, of creating an iron wall. Most of them was what the people are called today leftists, because Jabotinsky's iron wall was established and it stands today. It was established by the security forces, all its generations. I was one of them, from Ben-Gurion until today. We have to continue to ensure our power. That's the only guarantee for the consistent existence of us here. But the political regional opportunity is an evidence that our enemies assimilated and internalized our strength. And we, the security reasons of their right about the existential responsibility to hold Judea and Samaria as bad goods. It has no evidence. It's wrapped very casually with very loose seams. And we see the vision of the completely ludicrous Greater Israel started by Rabbi Kook. And now we have people who are very, very dangerous. We're talking now, for the last 2 years, a historical opportunity, the regional initiative regarding the Palestine. It's not going to be there forever. And if we miss it, all the responsibility is on Netanyahu. When Netanyahu asked his faction, allow me to manage it vis-a-vis Trump, He doesn't mean allow me to get the best achievement for Israel to an agreement, interim agreement, or maybe peace. As we learned from the Aqaba summit and the Sisi committee, he says, let me plan and let me manipulate Trump. I'm more experienced, I'll do it better with you, without all sorts of damages, without fingerprints, without changing anything. The right argument that there's nothing we can do because the Arabs are the same Arabs, the sea is the same sea. This is completely ludicrous. In the Six-Day War, we came out from that very limited border, and in fact we cannot go back to it, but we came out of it with a glorious victory. With 2 of the 3 defeated, we already have peace agreement, and we had a lot of tests with Egypt for 40 years. Jordan more than 20. The third, Syria, is already stuck for 6 years with a terrible civil war. In August 67, we had the 3 no's of Khartoum. You remember, not to recognition, not to negotiations, not to peace. What was taken by force will be returned by force. Today on the table, for the last 15 years, we have a Saudi and an Arab proposals. Both of them are not perfect. We cannot take them as is, but together with some reservations as one package, there definitely should be considered as something reasonable. To say in this reality, and because of the joint interest with the moderate Sunni countries, to say that there's nothing we can do and there's nobody to talk to, this is evading. This is a shameful avoidance of responsibility. And to conclude, we went through a whole slew of battles and controversies among us. All of them are important, but they're all connected to one another. Each of them is part of a fateful battle on the shape and its way and its future of Israel. Wakening up in the civil society and the battle on an active Zionist approach to political decisions, the battle for equal opportunities in the society and against fake news. If we talk about security, those and others are different sides of that same worrisome reality and the same crisis. The worrisome reality compels each and every one of us to stand up and do something vis-a-vis through this system, those law enforcement body, to get up and do something vis-a-vis a Minister of Education that enforces the academics not to have free speech, to get up and do something. The incitement of various publics in Israel to get up and do something. And anybody who jeopardizes the values of IDF in order to fulfill all sorts of ideas, stand up and act. And the ones who pushes Israel with naivete or with shrewdness to stand up and do something now, before it's going to be too late. The land and the soil is only beginning to burn. The change will only come through a vast and joint action. When the courage to change of the young people in general will meet the consideration and experience of the older people, and together the center, right and left, will create a camp of national security and responsibility without fear to form the right vision for Israel and to struggle with determination for achieving it. The leadership of Netanyahu, passive and victimized, at that point we can still thank him for what he did. That can also change one day. But his divisive and inciting leadership took us to the precipice with fear and fostering anxieties, wild animals from the outside and the collaborators from within. The foundations that will ensure the future of the Zionist project: first, security, unity of the people, and an exemplary society, are now jeopardized by all these extremists. They talk about one state and the greater Israel, even by jeopardizing the Zionist enterprise. And if the Prime Minister and all the members of Knesset that are dragged by the extremists as if they're blind, the destruction of Zionism. We cannot allow this. No way. History will never forgive us. History will never forgive us unless we know how to stop in time that new incarnation of Jewish blind zealous and bigotry. We have to remember what we're fighting for. It's not just a cosmetic change of this leader replaced by another. We are struggling for the way, decisions and values. Only joint organization that will put in its core a young, strong and value-based leadership and will organize all the forces in the political arena, and out of it will bring the right change that we needed in the direction to which Israel is going to. First of all is to try and foster the awareness of the people and to create it into a big flame. We need a big group to renew all the activities, not to emulate Netanyahu, which is hollow and empty, and not a pessimism of the losers. Only holding hand in hand of a majority of this Israeli society, together with political habits, will create the infrastructure for new, unifying, self-confident leadership that put Israel back on track and will bring it with courage and responsibility to the future. I call upon everybody. This is an hour of test and crisis. Before we are going to get to fascism, like Judea and Israel, or God forbid to apartheid, let's put aside all the trivia and let's focus in the joint challenge to bring back our Israel, to put it back on track. Let us all pull our sleeves and pull this wagon ahead. Thank you.